Greetings, and setting the scene. Hello and welcome. Before the era of modern forensic science and digital investigation, America, like many places around the world, witnessed chilling mysteries and unsolved serial murder cases that baffled even the toughest detectives. In those days, law enforcement mostly depended on traditional methods: careful questioning of witnesses, dog-eared notepads filled with scribbled clues, and a relentless instinct honed over years on the gritty city streets. Crimes often remained in the shadows for years, only coming to light when a killer slipped up or simply couldn't resist striking again. The chase was as much about intuition and luck as it was about method. But fast forward to the bustling, hyper-connected landscape of modern-day America in the late 2010s, and it's an entirely different world. Imagine neon-lit city blocks, humming with the pulse of social media, where a person can be tracked from a subway stop downtown to a quiet suburb miles away, all thanks to a digital footprint left behind. Police departments boast high-tech labs, facial recognition software, and access to swathes of data that would have seemed the stuff of dreams just a few decades ago. Yet with all these advancements, the specter of violence hasn't disappeared, and sometimes technology only seems to make the web more tangled, the criminals more elusive, and the consequences more terrifying. This story, one that has never really let go of me since I first heard it, unfolds in the midst of this new American reality. In 2017, with the country fixated on screens and news alerts pinging from every pocket, a seemingly ordinary young woman living in New Jersey vanished after meeting someone she'd encountered online. At first, it was just a worrying disappearance, a personal tragedy for her family and friends. But as the investigation deepened, what unraveled was beyond anything the police could have predicted. A pattern of horror that stretched far wider than anyone could have imagined, ultimately shaking communities coast to coast. Why does such a story matter in modern America? Because even as we pride ourselves on progress and protection, the darkest corners of humanity adapt to every new tool and every fleeting trend. In this digital age, we may think we're more connected and safer than ever, but sometimes the very networks we rely on can open invisible doors to unimaginable danger. So let's go back to where it all began, to a vibrant, complex city in New Jersey, amid the whir of trains and anonymous faces in the crowd, as a single moment of trust set off a chain of events that would haunt everyone involved. This is not simply a true crime tale. It's a reflection on vulnerability, on faith in the wrong place, and on how, in America, the line between hope and horror can be frighteningly thin. The mysterious disappearance in New Jersey. It all started in Newark, New Jersey, in the heart of one of America's most diverse and vibrant states. Amanda Coleman, a 23-year-old woman who had always lived in the shadows of her own challenges, suddenly vanished without a trace one blustery October afternoon in 2017. Amanda's story wasn't that of a typical missing person. It was layered, complicated, and heartbreakingly American in its details. She was a daughter, a sister, and above all a young woman who'd been forced to grow up too fast amid hardship. Her family life had never been easy. Her parents divorced when she was just a child, and the household had always seemed to be missing some crucial piece. Her mother, who Amanda lived with in a worn apartment complex on the city's west side, was battling a long-term illness. To make things more difficult, Amanda herself faced a daily battle with schizophrenia, a fact that kept her world smaller, filled with therapy appointments and days hidden behind closed curtains. Despite her inner storms, Amanda's brother Alex remained her anchor, even from afar. He lived 2 states away but checked in with her every day through social media and text messages. Their messages were full of love and a kind of codependent hope, a digital lifeline in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. After their mother's passing earlier that year, Amanda's life became even more unstable. Her symptoms spiraled. She spent several weeks in a mental health facility, then returned home, changed, more fragile, yet still stubbornly determined to recover. Alex clung to their routine, sending memes, encouragement, and gentle reminders about medication. For both siblings, the internet was a bridge, a surrogate for the warm and safe home they'd always wanted but never really had. On a chilly Monday morning that October, Alex noticed something was off. Amanda hadn't responded to his nightly goodnight message or his usual sunrise check-in. At first he told himself it was nothing unusual. Sometimes she slept late, sometimes her phone died. But as the hours stretched into a second and then a third day of silence, panic began setting in. He knew, better than anyone, how quickly Amanda's mental state could unravel. Was she isolating herself again, or had something else, something unthinkable happened? Alex decided not to wait. He tried calling, leaving voicemails, texting friends and neighbors, and even checking Amanda's social media accounts for any hint of activity. He logged into her Twitter profile, pulse pounding, and discovered a series of distressing posts she'd made in the days leading up to her disappearance, some suggesting a deep sense of despair, others that seemed to hint at meeting up with someone she'd met online. The words chilled him to the bone. Desperate, Alex started reaching out to anyone he could, including posting in Newark area community groups and calling the city's non-emergency police line. The reality was as stark as it gets. In a city where the hum of police sirens was as familiar as the morning traffic report, another missing person was hardly front-page news. Yet for Alex, this disappearance meant everything. He refused to let his sister become another statistic, lost in the shuffle of urban anonymity. Thus began a frantic, heart-wrenching search that would not only pull Amanda's family and friends into a months-long nightmare, but would also expose a hidden network of danger lurking within the very digital spaces they once thought offered connection and hope. In retrospect, it's clear, Amanda's vanishing acted as the first ripple in a tidal wave of horror that would soon engulf the city and shake the entire nation to its core. Signs of something strange online. It all started with patterns that, alone, may have seemed like nothing more than digital noise, but if you looked closer, as Amanda's brother Alex did, there were little red flags waving everywhere, buried in a timeline that many friends and even casual followers had simply scrolled past. Before Amanda's disappearance, her social profiles, especially her Twitter account, became a hard-to-read diary of isolation, anxiety, and slowly mounting despair. There were cryptic tweets about sleepless nights and voices that just wouldn't quiet down. Sometimes Amanda tweeted into the void at 3 a.m., messages that seemed like the kind of vague sadness everybody shared after a tough day, though hers slowly grew heavier, sharper, more desperate with each passing week. But things took a much darker turn when Alex used Amanda's saved logins to step into her online world, hoping to find just a sliver of comfort or, better yet, a solid clue. That's when he noticed a string of alarming posts that Amanda had made in the days leading up to her vanishing. No longer simply sad, her words suggested she felt cornered, invisible, bordering on hopeless. "If anyone knows what it's like to want out, message me," one tweet read. Below, unusual users, faces or names Alex didn't recognize, had left ominous comments, offers to meet, expressions of understanding or requests for direct messaging. Some sounded like genuine concern, but others oozed with manipulation or predatory curiosity. The language they used was chillingly familiar to anyone who's ever ventured into the shadowy corners of the internet, a blend of false empathy and subtle bait, as if they were casting a net for the most vulnerable. Within Amanda's direct messages, Alex found even more disturbing evidence. There were entire conversations with strangers who seemed to know far too much about her routine, fears, and hopes for escape. The eerie part wasn't just these people offering help, it was how quickly the dialogue turned personal, even suggestively intimate, and how they seemed to carefully sidestep Amanda's brother and friends who sometimes commented, trying to reassure her in public threads. Some users nudged Amanda toward tragic choices, a handful even bragged about helping others in similar positions before. Alex was left haunted by one particularly chilling exchange. A user with only a few followers, no real identity, and an avatar of a black cat, who insisted on meeting in person. The conversation began with gentle banter, but each message got subtly pushier, more persistent, until it was practically a demand. The user's final message trailed into Amanda's silence. "You don't have to be alone, not tonight anyway. We can finish what you started." Faced with this archive of digital breadcrumbs, Alex felt a deep dread, and now a growing certainty that what looked like simple online sadness may have been a trap. He tirelessly compiled screenshots, tracked usernames, and flagged suspicious activity. As fear gnawed at him, Alex reached out to online support groups, internet safety forums, and finally local authorities, hoping someone could untangle the web before it was too late. Long after Amanda's last status update, her brother was engulfed by the realization that in today's America, threats could be just a DM away, and sometimes horror doesn't knock on the front door, it quietly slides into the inbox. Police launch the investigation. When Amanda's family could no longer reach her and their own attempts at contact and search led nowhere, Alex, her brother, knew he had to act quickly. In America, missing persons cases, especially those involving young women with mental health histories, often walk a fine edge between being dismissed too soon and making headline news. Everything depended on how persistently the family demanded answers. Unlike the old days, the first 48 hours were widely recognized within law enforcement as crucial, a perception drilled into the public consciousness by countless police shows and true crime documentaries. On that chilly autumn day in Newark, Alex walked straight into the local police station, clutching his phone with Amanda's recent online activity, a timeline printed from her Twitter, and a worried energy that wouldn't let him sit still. The Newark Police Department responded with measured urgency. Modern policing in northern New Jersey had evolved with the times. Officers in pressed Navy uniforms paired with the buzz of high-tech crime labs, digital forensics experts, and well-worn police radios at the ready. The case was formally logged as a missing vulnerable adult. Detectives asked questions about Amanda's routines, her friends, medications, and crucially, their attention locked onto her digital world. Alex shared everything: cryptic messages concerning DMs, lists of suspicious usernames, and the unnerving patterns he'd uncovered while browsing through her accounts after she vanished. The detectives knew that every minute lost was a minute gained for a potential perpetrator. Within hours, a specialized cybercrime unit took the case. These were not the old-school cops scribbling in notepads. This team was fluent in hashtags and algorithms. From a shared conference room lined with LED screens cycling through CCTV feeds, they began triangulating Amanda's last digital footprint. They contacted cell phone providers to ping her location, subpoenaed Twitter for IP addresses, and began cross-referencing the times of her last messages with surveillance camera footage from Newark's train stations and busy street corners. Using cutting-edge facial recognition software, they matched Amanda's last known appearance to multiple camera angles, her exiting her building, entering Penn Station, and most chillingly, walking beside an unknown man through the crowd. The officers canvassed the neighborhood, asking neighbors for any recollections, checking businesses and restaurants along Amanda's likely route. They flagged her photo with transit authorities and nearby hospitals, compiling a real-time list of possible sightings. The department's public information officer prepared a missing persons alert, pushing her picture and case summary onto every social media platform and digital billboard in the region. Hope flickered amidst growing dread. Maybe she was still out there, somewhere, a camera or witness about to spot her. But as the digital evidence trickled in and the trail led farther away from Amanda's home, anxiety deepened. With each new piece of data, the police realized this wasn't just an ordinary runaway or isolated disappearance. The scope of the investigation quietly widened, ultimately pulling in not only city detectives but outside agencies, regional cybercrime task forces, and even the FBI. The clock was merciless. For Alex and the officers gripping their coffee and humming offices, the search for Amanda was no longer just a case number, it was a test of every procedure and hope the modern American system could muster. Tracing the clues. The hunt for Amanda's whereabouts moved into an intense, almost cinematic phase as detectives pored over the digital clues and city surveillance footage. The Newark Police's cybercrime unit and missing persons specialists now collaborated in real time, pulling recordings from train stations, building entrances, and street corners across Essex County. Hours of grainy security videos were scrutinized frame by frame as investigators looked for clues among the endless streams of commuters and anonymous faces. They soon struck upon vital evidence. Amanda, wearing her familiar blue hoodie and clutching a worn backpack, had been recorded at Newark Penn Station in the early afternoon of October 23rd. Just behind her, sometimes barely visible in the bustling crowd, was a thin young man with dark hair, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of a faded jacket. Cameras followed their path as they boarded a subway bound southwest toward Elizabeth, a smaller, working-class community nestled just outside Newark's urban clamor. For detectives, every step counted. They meticulously mapped out Amanda's journey, correlating timestamps, train schedules, and entry logs at turnstiles. Next, the trail led to Elizabeth Station, where the pair disembarked and made their way through a nondescript residential area lined with identical brick apartments and weathered street lamps. Neighbors remembered seeing a petite woman with nervous energy, escorted by a quiet man who seemed overly attentive, protective, or perhaps controlling. This sliver of testimony, though vague, nudged the officers to widen their search perimeter around several blocks, interviewing residents and poring over visitor logs in local buildings. Meanwhile, Alex, Amanda's brother, refused to sit on the sidelines. From his cramped apartment, his laptop became command central. He tracked online activity, pushed out missing person posts, and acted as liaison between the police and Amanda's online circle, who volunteered tips about accounts that seemed to match Amanda's last known contacts. In this digital relay, police and civilians chased after usernames, IPs, and faint whispers of Amanda's online presence that trickled in from every corner of the internet. As dusk settled over Elizabeth, hope and dread collided. Door-to-door interviews yielded descriptions matching Amanda and her companion, including a heated argument overheard on a stairwell. One building superintendent mentioned a new tenant, a quiet, jobless 20-something who rarely left his apartment and often received late-night visitors. Police ran background checks on all new residents and combed through relevant lease records, zeroing in on a small second-floor unit in a building nestled between the tracks and a used furniture store. Their investigation reached a fever pitch when a concerned local, previously in contact with Amanda via social media, reported a disturbing private message from a user strongly matching descriptions of the mysterious man. The message suggested an imminent meeting, referencing places only Amanda would frequent. Police raced to corroborate these digital threads against surveillance and public records evidence, building a profile of a suspect who used multiple digital identities, preyed on vulnerable people online, and maintained strict discretion in real life. With the pieces converging at that unremarkable Elizabeth apartment building, officers planned a stakeout. Unmarked cars lined the block. Undercover agents watched entrances as field teams waited for their target. In the muted glow of streetlights, the mundane facade of working-class America masked the sinister web stretching behind it. A web that officers now believed Amanda had stumbled into, unwittingly launching one of New Jersey's most complex criminal chases in years. Midnight Sting Operation. The air in Elizabeth, New Jersey was thick with anticipation as the city's skyline flickered under the glow of distant streetlights. It was nearing midnight on October 30th when the atmosphere among the investigators changed from tension to laser-sharp focus. After days of chasing digital leads and poring over hours of surveillance footage, the police believed they were on the verge of a major breakthrough. Information from an anonymous online informant, someone who claimed to have exchanged unsettling private messages with the suspected perpetrator, provided the final, crucial clue. The informant described messages that referenced a clandestine meeting at the local train station, as well as knowledge-matching details only Amanda and those involved would know. It was enough for the authorities to take immediate and decisive action. Police strategists huddled in a makeshift command post just blocks from the station, piecing together a rapid plan with no room for error. Every detail had to be airtight. Officers in plain clothes would blend in with late-night commuters, while an unmarked van waited nearby as backup. Officers confirmed the train schedule, determined precisely where the suspect might disembark, reviewed his known patterns and social cues, and mapped out escape routes in case things took a dangerous turn. With Alex, the victim's brother, watching anxiously in the background but shielded from direct danger, the task force was ready to move from digital forensics to physical apprehension. Shortly before midnight, the suspect emerged, a gaunt young man, roughly matching the appearance of the shadowy figure seen alongside Amanda in surveillance footage. His gait was nervous but determined. Detectives, dressed down in jeans and hoodies, shadowed him as he made his way from the train platform, blending seamlessly into the swirl of late-night travelers. The suspect wound his way through narrow city blocks, never realizing he was being watched. Tension spiked when he paused in front of a run-down brick apartment building. The exterior was unremarkable, with chipped paint and cracked windows, a fitting camouflage for someone desperate to remain invisible. As the suspect entered, plainclothes officers followed at a distance, noting the faint flicker of fluorescent lights from the building's interior, and the deepening silence of the hour. Inside, the building's hallways were lined with faded carpet and smelled faintly of mildew, but on this night, there was something else. A strange, acrid undertone that immediately unsettled one of the officers advanced down the hall. The suspect climbed the stairs, reached the second floor, and unlocked the door to a particular apartment, a unit investigators had identified as a likely hideout. Convinced this was the right moment, the lead detective gave the signal. Within seconds, backup officers closed off the exits below, blocking any possible escape route. The arrest team approached quietly. One officer pressed a gloved hand against the door to test if it was locked. Listening intently, they heard the faint sound of footsteps moving within. The suspect was pacing. A final check with the informant confirmed everything. The last message had confirmed the suspect would be home and alone. With adrenaline pumping, officers knocked loudly and announced themselves. Silence followed. then a sudden flurry of panicked noise from inside. Fearing for possible evidence destruction or an impending flight, police forcibly entered the apartment. The door gave way with a splintering crack. Officers burst through in practiced formation, flashlights and firearms drawn. The smell inside was instantly overpowering, a thick, putrid miasma that suggested something terrible hid within those grimy walls. As officers moved forward, their beams of light swept over a small, cluttered living room littered with discarded food containers, clothing, and a tangle of old electronics. The suspect had tried to escape through the bathroom window but was swiftly apprehended and pinned to the floor. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, officers secured the scene and brought in specialized forensic units. Alex, though kept at a safe distance, could only watch as his family's tragedy and months of sleepless nights reached a harrowing climax. Forensics officers donned protective gear and began a painstaking search for evidence. While the initial visual survey was unnerving enough, with its detritus of a life lived in near-total isolation, what truly shocked investigators was what they discovered behind the hastily arranged furniture and inside several large blue plastic tubs that had been placed against the far wall. Each container was filled with a layer of odor-absorbing material and sealed as tightly as possible, but nothing could fully mask the gruesome reality lying beneath. The discovery turned a tense midnight operation into a full-blown crime scene investigation. The forensic teams documented every inch of the small apartment, collecting everything from discarded latex gloves and surgical masks to handwritten notes and various sharp implements. They realized the apartment had been meticulously prepared for hiding its dark secrets. Even the bathroom tiles had been pried up and replaced in spots, as if someone had tried to erase every trace of horror within the room. At the same time, a neighbor who'd always considered the apartment's resident as simply reclusive, now found herself recounting to officers odd smells that sometimes wafted into the hallway and the occasional sounds of heavy dragging late at night. Fellow tenants, awakened by the late-night commotion of the raid, peeked nervously from behind doors as police moved evidence bags and snapped flash photographs. The sight of officers carrying the heavy sealed tubs out into the corridor left no doubt that something truly horrific had been uncovered. Technicians also recovered multiple cell phones, laptops, and external drives, each now crucial links in reconstructing the network of online aliases and dark conversations that had drawn Amanda, and possibly others, into the suspect's orbit. Officers began the grim work of cataloging the scene, while detectives took the trembling suspect into custody. The individual, thin, exhausted, and eerily calm after a brief struggle, refused to speak, keeping his gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum as officers recited his rights. Outside, the block illuminated with red and blue police lights as word spread among local reporters and neighbors alike that authorities had uncovered something of terrible consequence. The media frenzy began almost immediately. With so many unanswered questions, how many victims? How long had this gone on? What else would investigators find in the digital trove seized from the apartment? The police remained tight-lipped, focusing on their methodical job of securing evidence and safeguarding potential survivors' privacy. Alex, after being allowed to confirm the grim identity of a few belongings, broke down quietly as officers guided him away from the scene. For him, and for the police, the midnight sting operation was both an endpoint to a fevered search and the chilling threshold of a much deeper investigation ahead. In the days that followed, as forensics labs combed through DNA and analysts pieced together digital messages, it became clear that the work begun in those tense midnight hours would change the shape of the entire case and in some ways the city itself for years to come. Horrifying exploration at the scene. The discovery inside the dimly lit apartment on that fateful night was nothing less than a living nightmare. For the seasoned investigators who'd seen nearly every facet of urban tragedy, nothing in their past careers prepared them for the horror that unfolded when they stepped through that battered door. The first sense to be overwhelmed was smell, a thick, cloying mix of bleach, decay, and something sour that immediately squeezed each officer's lungs and threatened to turn their stomachs. Even the most hardened of the team paused for a split second before continuing. Bare bulbs flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows across heaps of dirty laundry, random electronics in half-dismantled piles, and strange blue plastic tubs lining the living room wall. The scene was at once chaotic and unnaturally methodical, a den of filth laced with a deliberate, sinister purpose. Sergeant Howard, head of the forensic response team, was the first to hone in on the plastic tubs. Their lids were awkwardly clipped shut, and a thick layer of cat litter partially spilled over the sides. His gloved hand carefully pried one open. The moment the seal broke, waves of putrid air flooded the room. Gasps and curses followed as the team realized what lay inside. Human remains, meticulously dismembered, wrapped in layers of trash bags, and submerged in the absorbent litter as if to suppress evidence from prying eyes and unsuspecting noses. The initial tub wasn't the only one. As the sweep continued, investigators unearthed a gruesome pattern, body parts organized and labeled, evidence of a mind both deeply disturbed and eerily rational. The shock spread with each new lid opened. The apartment was soon flooded with activity. Additional units arrived, crime scene tape went up in the hallways, and the building crackled with whispered rumors, curious eyes spying through barely opened doors. The blue tubs became the dark center of the investigation, each one a macabre time capsule containing its own story. Some contained identifiable features like jewelry or tattoos, while others were more methodically stripped of identity, hair shaved, tags cut from clothing, fingertips deliberately damaged. The effort put into obscuring these young lives hinted at long periods of planning and a chilling detachment from the horror being perpetrated. Investigators methodically set about cataloging the entire scene. Photography specialists documented every inch, capturing the state of the apartment's kitchen with its untouched, rotting food and the bathroom where the tiles had been pried loose, leaving behind muddy fingerprints and tool marks. Under the mattress, officers uncovered blood-stained rags and a notebook filled with frantic, jagged handwriting. It detailed not only day-to-day anxieties but potential targets and musings about pain, control, and loneliness. There were chilling sketches of what appeared to be his process. Maps, timelines, code words, and digital usernames, many of which soon matched the deceased. The windowless back closet, jammed shut with a metal bar, revealed more evidence. Bags stuffed with women's purses, old cell phones, and a shoebox packed with driver's licenses. Each belonged to someone whose parents had once clung to hope for their safe return. In the digital age, evidence is never confined to four walls. Technicians seized every computing device from battered laptops to a tower of cheap prepaid cell phones, each caked with grime but holding precious bits of data, a web of torment spinning out from this one location, possibly across years and state lines. The forensics team worked in silence, the gravity of the discoveries flattening the usual banter. Seasoned detectives excused themselves every half hour to breathe, splash water on their faces, or simply weep in the hall before returning. It became immediately clear that what they'd uncovered stretched far beyond the initial missing person case. This was likely the dump site of a serial predator, a predator who, hidden from sight inside the anonymity of the internet, preyed on the weak and unseen. Outside the apartment, confusion and shock fanned into panic as word reached neighbors and then the press. News vans pulled up in the early hours, their headlights mingling with flashing blue and red. Residents recounted odd noises in past months, the dragging thuds, muffled arguments, and a chemical tang that sometimes crept under doors. One woman, clutching her robe, described a feeling of something evil living next to us this whole time. Building management stammers to reporters, insistence of regular checks and assurances that any previous complaints had been routine. But the scale of the horror, now undeniable, left a stain on the entire community. Meanwhile, detectives worked fast, lifting fingerprints, extracting fibers, scraping beneath fingernails and from under tiles. The DNA lab's phones rang off the hook that night as the victims' remains were tagged, numbered, and sent for urgent analysis. For every part positively identified, an investigator had to break the worst news of another missing child to a new, unsuspecting family. The apartment became a grim pilgrimage site for forensics, digital experts, and crime scene cleaners, each group quietly documenting the aftermath while the city around them reeled. Director Daniels, who supervised the operation, later confessed he'd never seen such a calculated blending of chaos and control, so much effort to destroy evidence yet so much left behind, as if the perpetrator had grown tired or sought to be found. Psychologists called in to consult saw in the notes left behind both grandiosity and desperation, a narrative of someone starving for influence yet incapable of connecting to the world outside his own twisted logic. As dawn crept over the city, the blue tubs left the building on stretchers, each accompanied by a silent guard. News choppers circled overhead. The case had exploded into a national sensation, with parents everywhere eyeing their children's bedrooms and opening social media accounts they had never touched. The city of Elizabeth, New Jersey, would never be the same. For those on the inside, detectives, technicians, and Amanda's devastated brother, the horror was intimate and shattering. Every hallway echo, every scrap of evidence became a silent plea not to let these stories be forgotten or reduced to sensational footnotes. In the aftermath, trauma counselors and clergy arrived to help process what had happened, acknowledging that healing, for both the community and the individuals closest to the tragedy, would not come easily or quickly. What stood long after the evidence bags were sealed and the door to that cursed apartment was bolted for good was a harrowing testament to the vulnerability of the most overlooked among us, those who, through isolation or mental struggle, can be drawn into invisible danger lurking behind banal facades. The city, and maybe the whole nation, would spend years contending with the darkness uncovered in that little apartment, vowing to never again miss the warning signs, however faint or fleeting they might appear. The identities of the victims. As the days crawled by after that horrific midnight raid, the city buzzed with nervous disbelief. But inside the forensics lab, a different kind of work was underway. A painstaking, emotionally taxing effort to restore names and stories to the unknown. The discovery of multiple blue plastic tubs filled with dismembered remains had left investigators with a daunting, somber task. Identifying the individuals whose lives had been brutally cut short, and whose families had spent months, even years, trapped between hope and dread. The initial step was methodical. Teams carefully logged every artifact: watches, bracelets, faded t-shirts, tattoos still visible beneath the marks of trauma, and even a single well-worn notebook with childish doodles. These small tokens were sometimes the only link back to a missing person's former life. The State Crime Laboratory worked in concert with federal agents, introducing DNA analysis, fingerprint examination, and facial reconstruction for partial remains. Databases of missing persons in the tri-state area lit up as scientists raced through creased case files, matching dental records, cross-referencing previous police notes, and sifting through years of still open cases. Amanda Coleman's identification brought both relief and grief, confirming what Alex and her friends couldn't bear to say aloud. Her battered blue hoodie, still stitched with her mother's initials, painstakingly described in early reports, became both a relic and a curse, returning her to her family but condemning them to unimaginable finality. In the following days, more matches surfaced. Each one told a distinct, heartbreaking American story, but together they revealed a chilling pattern. A 15-year-old named Tasha Green, reported missing over a year earlier from Atlantic City, was next. She'd lived most of her life in foster care, sometimes running away to escape neglect or abuse. Her foster mother, weathered by the system's failures, had called police when she didn't come home from school. For a year, she pinned flyers on bus stops and pleaded on Facebook, always messaging strangers who hinted they might have seen Tasha. Her cameo bracelet, found with the remains, was a gift she never took off, a detail that allowed for a positive match. There was Marisol Perez, 19, a college sophomore who battled undiagnosed depression and anxiety. She disappeared from her residence hall at a New Brunswick community college after telling friends she was going to meet a supportive friend she had met online. Marisol's family, first-generation immigrants from Guatemala, initially thought she had simply run away to escape school pressure. Only when her battered sneakers were found among the evidence did the truth dawn. The pain echoed through her community. She had been on the verge of transferring to a 4-year university. A list was soon assembled, each name the culmination of months or years of tense searching. Emily Tran, 22, Newark. Known for her big laugh and fierce loyalty, she had recently dropped out of her theater program and was struggling with loneliness. Her social media profile showed a lonely countdown to her final days. Malik Whitfield, 20, from Patterson. Caring for his aging grandmother, he found solace in late-night online chats. Some suspected he left for work and simply vanished. His family scoured shelters, hoping but never knowing. Yasmin Clark, 17, from Camden. Her school counselor described her as intensely private. She was last seen at a bus depot, clutching a battered copy of her favorite fantasy novel, found in the apartment, inscribed with her initials. Harper Lee, 23, from Hoboken. A talented photographer with bipolar disorder, their Instagram was a visual diary of struggle and hope. Their camera, still loaded with film, was recovered along with their remains. Olivia Baxter, 18, of Jersey City, left home with promises of meeting a mysterious mentor. Police found emails with that same online alias traced to the suspect. Lauren Fitzgerald, 26, originally from Delaware, had moved to New Jersey seeking a new life after escaping domestic abuse. The only contact she maintained was through an anonymous online forum, her username scribbled in the suspect's notebook. 9 victims were finally identified after weeks of grueling technical work and emotional interviews with families. Each case represented a familiar thread: those who had reached out for connection in the digital void, those struggling with isolation or psychological wounds, those lured by the illusion of safety behind a screen. They spanned races and backgrounds, but nearly all had histories of loneliness, family disruption, or mental health crises, traits the eventual suspects seemed to seek out and exploit with chilling precision. For the city, the revelations were both shattering and deeply personal. Candlelight vigils sprang up across neighborhoods, with memorial walls painted with the victims' names and photographs. At each gathering, family and friends shared memories, a favorite joke, a beloved pet, a dream that never had a chance to blossom. A citywide memorial was held at a Newark church attended by hundreds, including police, social workers, and strangers, who simply could not forget the faces they had seen plastered on missing posters. Schools and community centers hosted forums on internet safety and support for survivors of trauma, efforts driven by a collective vow to honor those 9 young lives. Yet beneath the sorrow, there simmered anger, at a society that let the most vulnerable slip through the cracks, at platforms that profited from attention while failing to protect. The work of healing was just beginning, and to this day the memory of Amanda, Tasha, Marisol, and the others lingers like a warning and a plea. To notice, to reach out, to care, before it is too late. Portrait of the perpetrator. Jacob Marshall was an enigma wrapped in the most ordinary exterior, so unremarkable that neighbors in his crumbling Elizabeth apartment barely noticed when he passed by. He was 27 years old, American by birth, raised in the economically stagnant outlands of suburban Philadelphia. Jacob's childhood had the makings of 1,000 forgotten stories across America. A mother who faded further into the background each year, a father who worked odd factory shifts when employment was available and drank away his worries when it wasn't. Their small house always felt cold, half-lit, cluttered with old newsprint and silent accusation. Jacob was not violent in school, nor was he memorable. He struggled with attention and making friends, dreading every gym class or school dance. His grades were poor, but just enough to keep him from being held back. He would sit alone on yellowing benches at recess, drawing circles in the dust. At home, quiet and mostly ignored, Jacob turned to the comfort of obsolete computers and outdated video games. He found the internet early. A battered family desktop in the kitchen became a portal to anonymous message boards and gaming forums. Places where his shyness and awkwardness weren't just invisible but irrelevant. Jacob soon gravitated to dark corners of online communities, sub-forums and chat rooms dedicated to lonely souls desperately searching for belonging, comfort, or any sense of recognition. He lurked more than he spoke, absorbing the culture of misery that shaped his adolescent world. As a teenager, Jacob began to disappear for hours, sometimes days, wandering the city, sometimes crashing in abandoned houses. Police once picked him up, but his parents never pressed for details. The first signs of his growing estrangement from reality manifested as cryptic remarks to teachers and peers alike, strange fixations and paranoia, a subdued but brewing storm. Diagnosed with a mild depressive disorder bordering on social anxiety, Jacob drifted further from the mainstream, out of school, out of work, and eventually away from even the most basic social bonds. He spent his 20s moving from job to job, janitor, supermarket night stalker, delivery driver for unreliable apps. None of them lasted. Jacob's only consistent relationships were with strangers online, aliases and avatars whose true faces he would never know, but whose pain seemed to echo his own. Drawn to crisis forums and message boards for people suffering from depression, loss, and abuse, Jacob honed his ability to listen, to pose as a sympathetic ear. But over time this online empathy curdled into something exploitative and then predatory. Jacob became obsessed with the mechanics of influence, how the right message at the right moment could push someone from despair to action. His digital footprints multiplied. At least 5 Twitter accounts, each with a crafted persona, one a supportive friend, another a seen-it-all survivor, a couple feigning romantic interest, each active at different hours and days, all learning to prey on vulnerability. He studied what words triggered anxiety, what responses produced trust. By day he was withdrawn and distant. By night he played puppet master with strangers, joining forums for the lonely, sliding into conversations with the broken-hearted, the lost. Behind his apartment door, Jacob was intensely private and methodical. He kept journals, scraps of paper covered in hatch marks, notes about users, observations on behavior he noticed online, lists of places in New York and New Jersey where people tended to disappear. In a battered spiral notebook, he built psychological profiles, and most chillingly, scripted dialogues designed to draw people out, to promise comfort, to coax them toward risky or isolated meetings. No evidence suggested he belonged to any cult or ideological group. His worldview was shaped by personal failure, digital anonymity, and the ever-deepening need for power or connection on his own twisted terms. The build-up to 2017 was slow. Jacob's attacks were not crimes of passion, nor were they messy or impulsive. He exercised patience, sometimes communicating for weeks. Earnest replies, late-night check-ins, fabricated empathy. He manipulated his targets into revealing details of their daily lives, where they lived, when they felt most alone, their fears, their hopes for escape or rescue. Jacob would identify those isolated enough that their absence would not trigger an immediate outcry, and he adapted his methods with chilling pragmatism whenever police activity or news coverage threatened to close in. Jacob was an avid collector, screenshots, private messages, videos, even audio recordings. The police would eventually recover 23 cell phones, several old laptops, and boxes of USB drives carefully hidden in his apartment labeled in code. Forensic analysis revealed sprawling chat logs full of fake promises, threats, and careful psychological manipulation. Even the layout of the apartment spoke to isolation: blackout curtains, stacks of microwavable dinners, bolt-locked doors, and a toolbox that could have belonged to any handyman, except its contents were tailored for far more sinister purposes. Neighbors described Jacob as just quiet, kept to himself, sometimes odd odors from his unit but otherwise never caused trouble. When questioned, a handful recalled seeing him at odd hours carrying large bags or boxes, but nobody thought enough of it to call the police. The anonymity of city life camouflaged his movements. No one had the full picture, and Jacob had chosen his hiding place precisely for its indifference. His direct interactions with law enforcement before 2017 were minimal. An old trespassing charge as a teenager, dismissed when his mother appeared in court. A welfare check prompted by a neighbor's concern quickly closed after Jacob opened the door, eyes down, mumbling reassurances. On paper, he was a ghost. Not a single doctor, probation officer, or mental health counselor ever connected the deeper traces of his paranoia, isolation, and growing fascination with digital control to the kind of risk he secretly posed. What truly set Jacob apart was not just his ability to mimic empathy or gain trust, but his understanding of how to stay marginal, never getting too close, never recycling an identity too obviously, and, if needed, vanishing into the depths of other cities until the trail grew cold. Police theorized that his first attempts at real-world meetings were failures. Survivors later reported feeling creeped out, blocking him just in time after odd, controlling messages, but he learned. In every new encounter, he became more sophisticated, switching platforms, using VPNs to cover his tracks, and deleting traces with obsessive regularity. For Jacob, the apartment was both lair and laboratory. Its tiny rooms bore silent witness to a mind oscillating between desperation for acknowledgement and the exercise of total, terrifying power. Crumpled printouts lined the walls, missing person flyers, social media screenshots, maps. He left almost no personal mementos save for one box of childhood photographs, most of them worn at the edges, faces turned to the wall. When FBI profilers and forensic psychologists finally pieced together Jacob Marshall's double life, their initial profile drafted a picture of a deeply alienated individual, hyper-intelligent socially yet totally incapable of regular intimacy, impulsive in digital outreach but methodical to a fault when executing a plan. They found the remnants of failed self-help projects, notes for suicide prevention posts drafted but never sent, and the curious evidence of a man who wanted to both save and destroy others, perhaps as a twisted reflection of his own fractured psyche. Those who briefly intersected with Jacob across the years, social workers, old teachers, online moderators, later expressed a blend of regret and disbelief. Many missed the warning signs or simply mistook him for another lost young man, directionless in a city full of them. In group chats and backlogged email chains, authorities found small, chilling glimpses into Jacob's thinking, threads where he posed as both victim and counselor, sometimes nurturing, other times subtly cruel. He offered late-night comfort to people in pain, only to switch to manipulation, nudging them toward meeting him in person as the ultimate test of their trust. After his arrest, psychological examination revealed a chilling absence of remorse. Jacob seemed detached, speaking in clipped, abstract terms. He described his actions as experiments or exchanges, never conceding the humanity of his victims or expressing guilt for what he'd done. Hours of recorded interviews painted the portrait of a man who, in his own mind, was always the loner and the observer, a watcher of pain, a curator of disconnection, never its author. He sometimes referenced internet subcultures where helping or befriending the lonely can mask deep, predatory motives. Police and experts alike struggled to piece together a motive more complex than evil. It was a stomach-turning mix of digital addiction, untreated illness, and the self-justification of someone who'd given up on belonging by any means except dominance. The tragedy, as his trial would later show, was that Jacob had been lost long before his crimes ever began. Lost within the machinery of poverty and neglect, then swallowed by the boundless, indifferent expanse of the web. The victims, who reached out for solace and found only the carefully set trap of a man who had learned to speak their language of sadness, were the sharpest indictment possible of both systemic failure and technological naivete. In the end, Jacob Marshall's portrait was less of a monster and more a study in agonizing banality, the dangerous outcome of a society that turns its eyes away from the invisible and the suffering, and a digital culture that can obscure true intentions behind layers of validation, anonymity, and algorithmic echo. His story became a case study in American law enforcement and mental health circles, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most catastrophic evil arrives not in flourish or spectacle, but in silence, stealth, and endless, unnoticed isolation. The investigation and subsequent revelations around Jacob Marshall forced vital questions to the surface. How many more exist in the silent periphery, and what can be done to ensure that no one else slides so quietly through the cracks, where a screen or a shadowy avatar is the only voice someone hears? Twisted psychology and cunning schemes. To try to understand the depths of evil behind these crimes is to venture into a maze of manipulation, delusion, and lonely cunning. Jacob Marshall did not stumble into violence on a whim or act out of raw impulse. His darkness was a slow-blooming thing, intricately planned, hidden behind digital curtains, sharpened by years of pain and observation. Peering into his psychological profile, criminal psychiatrists and digital forensics experts would eventually piece together one undeniable reality. The horror Jacob wrought wasn't just vicious, it was methodical, crafted step by step through a mind that understood both emotional suffering and the new tools the internet offered for predation. Jacob's pathology revealed itself in digital footprints and hand-scribbled notebooks, but also in the forensic tapestry woven from his victims' stories. He was, above all, a patient hunter. His schemes began in places most people scroll past absent-mindedly: mental health forums, crisis support groups, niche social platforms catering to those burdened by depression or alienation. There, he learned the language of desperation, how the lonely reached, how the hurt signaled their sense of being on the edge, how the quietest cries for connection can be the most urgent. He cultivated 5 or more distinct online identities, each tailored with unnerving accuracy: a caring big sister, a supportive old friend, a survivor of trauma, a sometimes flirtatious confidant. These avatars each operated at different times, never in tandem, and each left indirect breadcrumbs that could only be seen by someone with access to his private, labyrinthine digital maps. The grooming process was slow, deliberate, and chilling. Jacob knew to wait. His opening messages never asked, they only listened. He echoed language his victims used, mirrored loneliness, validated the desire to be understood. Medical experts would later point out how, in interviews, Jacob described himself as the only one who could really see the pain, not because he was truly empathetic, but because suffering was the currency he could exploit. Often he tracked multiple possible targets simultaneously, choosing the ones whose digital routines were most predictable, whose replies were quickest, whose needs seemed deepest and least likely to find intervention from friends or family. He keyed into those little silences between posts, those sleepless 3 a.m. rants, those private admissions of relapse, hopelessness, or family fracture. He pushed boundaries subtly. In chat logs later unearthed, a definite turning point could be traced. The conversations would move from generalized comfort to ever more personal disclosures. He would give just enough of himself, sometimes a detail about his fake job, sometimes a fabricated loss in his own life, to build intimacy. Then would come gentle nudges toward secrecy. It's easier if you don't tell anyone about us. People don't understand. Jacob would sometimes send small gifts, digital vouchers or couriered care packages, purchased online under assumed names, shipped from generic warehouse accounts, deepening dependency and gratitude. Occasionally he even advised against therapy or speaking to police, always tiptoeing around red flags to avoid drawing suspicion. Jacob's notes, later seized in his apartment, showed color-coded victim profiles. Each was categorized by perceived risk, vulnerability, and logistical factors like geography and routines. He recorded the timestamps of their posts, their responses to stress, birthdays, and anniversaries, any life event that could serve as a catalyst for renewed despair and therefore renewed contact. He developed checklists for readiness after weeks or months of grooming. Had the victim isolated themselves? Did anyone else ever comment on their posts? Was there a recent fight with family? Had they deleted other friends? When digital rapport reached its apex, Jacob began proposing offline connections, the ultimate test of the trust he'd so carefully cultivated. He never used the same tactics twice and always let his target suggest meeting spots in the middle, reinforcing the illusion of agency. These meetings were sometimes preceded by days of silence, as if letting the bond grow not just with him, but with the fantasy of escape from loneliness itself. These final negotiations were meticulously documented in his notebooks, written in a code only he understood, cross-referenced to usernames, days, and emotional triggers. His ability to remain invisible was rooted not only in technological savvy, VPNs, burner phones, clean browser histories, but in his genuine belief that he was always smarter than whatever security measures could be put in place. Criminal psychologists would later debate whether Jacob's actions stemmed purely from a predatory disorder, or whether unresolved trauma, untreated mental illness, and deep-seated delusions of grandeur played intertwined roles. In interview after interview, various experts surfaced the paradox of his nature, a sense of brokenness fueling the need to control, save, destroy, and be noticed, all at once. Some even suggested that Jacob's meticulousness, the elaborate routines of hiding evidence, the obsessive segmentation of online personas, was not just a way to avoid capture, but an enacted fantasy of mastery over chaos. One of the most chilling revelations in the forensic analysis was Jacob's spreadsheet of risk reduction strategies. Listed were key phrases to avoid, symptoms that might alert law enforcement, and even links to news stories about digital-related arrests. Each time a high-profile missing persons case surfaced in the media and was quickly solved, Jacob updated his protocols, learning from the mistakes of others. He cross-referenced local crime statistics, checked Twitter trends in different states, and avoided as a rule anyone with an active protective circle online or off. Perhaps what was most terrifying was how little Jacob left to chance. The very apartment he rented was chosen for the anonymity of transient neighbors and the near-constant background noise from the commuter rail outside, covering any out-of-place sounds. He set up Wi-Fi using stolen identities, paid for utilities with preloaded gift cards, and even composed text chains with fake family members to supply to building managers if questioned. His kill kits, bags of cleaning supplies, disposable gloves, and makeshift restraints were all acquired through online bulk wholesalers, detached from his real-life persona. The aftermath of his crimes exposed a society not just wounded by violence but by the realization that such predation can be so carefully crafted in the internet age. Family members of victims testified to how Jacob's digital persona had seemed more real, more compassionate, than anyone in the victim's immediate world. Some even shared heartbreaking logs of last conversations, brimming with hope, relief, or the sense of being finally seen. Psychiatrists and victim advocates scrutinized these digital traces and warned that Jacob's methods could be easily replicated, even industrialized by others searching for the same hollow power. Looking back, law enforcement and researchers questioned what warning signs had been overlooked. Was it technology's fault for enabling such anonymity? Was it a failure of mental health systems, unable to recognize both Jacob's spiral and his target's vulnerability? Was the media too slow to connect the dots? Or schools and social networks too passive in protecting the lonely and lost? Ultimately, Jacob Marshall's twisted psychology was a tragic convergence of personal pain, isolation, and a digital landscape that unintentionally provided both the weapons and the camouflage. His schemes, coldly rational and yet born of profound human bewilderment, stand as a call for vigilance, compassion, and the development of better safeguards in a world where digital friendship can be a gateway to unimaginable harm. Recurring crimes and society's helplessness. In reflecting on the devastating events that unfolded across New Jersey, what haunts me most is not just the brutality of the crimes but the striking pattern, A cycle that repeated itself again and again, revealing profound flaws in the barriers meant to protect vulnerable people in society. Each new disappearance could have been the last, a horrifying aberration. Instead, it became part of a disturbing sequence. Young individuals drawn into a web of false promises, their loneliness weaponized, and the warning signs too often unheeded or unseen. The detailed investigation exposed how the perpetrator's methodology exploited not only the weaknesses of his chosen victims, but also the systemic gaps in America's patchwork social and technological safety nets. He carefully selected those who already seemed invisible: young adults battling mental health issues, growing up in unstable homes, or cycling through under-resourced support programs. Many had sought help before, some from state agencies, some from schools or shelters, and many from the faceless communities of the internet. Yet over and over support was fragmented, brief, or daunting to access. For every hotline called, a caseworker with too many files to read. For every automated content warning online, an ocean of harmful messages slipping through the cracks. The failures were rarely malicious. They were the outcome of systems stretched past capacity, schools struggling with ever shorter counseling budgets, police departments facing hundreds of missing person reports monthly, tech platforms overwhelmed by billions of posts, and unable to distinguish a cry for help from background noise. Looking back, the repetition of these crimes was tragically predictable, if not inevitable. It began with a digital message sent during a moment of vulnerability, grew into a private online conversation, and steadily escalated into secretive meetings far from the watchful eyes of friends or authorities. The killer refined each step, studying victims' behavioral cues, testing the limits of the platforms he haunted, and boldly adapting when his methods came close to exposure. The disturbing fluidity with which these crimes unfolded pointed to more than just individual cunning. It laid bare a culture still learning how to recognize and respond to danger in spaces where relationships can turn intimate and dangerous in a matter of days, even hours. For families and survivors, this repetitive cycle bred a fierce combination of anger, despair, and self-doubt. Many parents who had lost contact with their children alternated between hope and terror with each day that passed, waiting desperately for a text, a social media post, or a knock at the door. When the truth surfaced, it brought a crushing sense of betrayal, not just from one depraved individual, but from institutions that had failed to see the warning signs or act before tragedy struck. In support groups, mothers and fathers traded stories of frantic calls to law enforcement, hours spent combing through web histories and chat logs, and the heartache of being taken too lightly when trying to express their fears for their loved one's safety. This pain was mirrored, in turn, by the frontline responders who faced the same cycle of futility. Police officers described the toll of opening yet another missing person inquiry with few leads and many doubts. Social workers struggled to maintain hope as caseloads became unmanageable and follow-up stretched from days to weeks or fell apart entirely. And counselors, tasked with supporting traumatized families, often found themselves wishing for better tools, for more funding, more training, more bridges between disparate agencies that operated in isolation rather than collaboration. Perhaps nowhere did this sense of helplessness reverberate more loudly than in the digital realm. Social media platforms, with their algorithms driven by engagement and reach, proved ill-equipped to detect the nuance of manipulation and suffering. While companies had begun deploying more sophisticated tools to flag explicit threats or self-harm, the perpetrator thrived precisely in those gray zones, poses of concern that masked predation, coded language that slipped past filters, and a revolving door of fake accounts that responded to each ban with new identities. The reality is that while technology can scale connection and knowledge in miraculous ways, it can also multiply the reach of harm if not treated with vigilance and humanity every step of the way. Community after community asked the same question in the aftermath: how could this happen again? Candlelight vigils and impassioned town hall meetings took place across New Jersey as people gathered to mourn, search for answers, and demand meaningful change. School boards discussed expanded mental health resources and digital literacy programs. Parents pressed for accountability from social media companies and law enforcement. Advocates for trauma survivors lobbied for reform in the foster care and welfare systems that had failed too many times. There was talk of never again, but always, in the background, a chilling uncertainty as to whether the next predator was already browsing their own neighborhood's message boards, searching for another lonely voice in the darkness. For all the technological and social progress of the 21st century, the story of these repeated crimes highlighted the oldest dangers: social fragmentation, unaddressed mental illness, the stigma of reaching for help, and the vulnerability that comes with isolation. The digital world brought new opportunities for connection, but also for subterfuge. The killer's calculated routine, reaching out to the suffering and unseen, would never have succeeded without a society willing to let its most fragile members become invisible in plain sight. Even when police and community leaders came together to sound the alarm, there were always more cracks to slip through, more nights when a message unanswered could be the start of another tragedy. There has been some progress since. The case forced social media companies to review content moderation, and more training has been provided to teachers and healthcare professionals on the warning signs of digital grooming and exploitation. Laws in some states were updated to require better coordination between schools, law enforcement, and mental health agencies. But the deeper lesson persists. Powerful technology without compassionate, vigilant oversight will always fall short. It is not enough to add more filters or fund more software. A truly resilient society is one where every warning sign counts, every digital cry for help is taken seriously, and every isolated young person is seen and valued before a predator can reach them first. As I reflect on this case, I feel a persistent ache, a mix of grief for the families forever changed, and frustration at the machinery of modern life that so easily breeds disconnection. These repeated crimes are a tragic call to action to rebuild our systems, not just with more security measures, but with a renewed commitment to empathy and vigilance. Until then, the cycle of harm will remain, haunting the quiet corners of our cities and our screens, reminding us how much the safety of the vulnerable depends upon what we choose to see, and how swiftly we are willing to act before another pattern begins anew. Trial and community awakening. The wheels of justice grind painfully slow, but in cases as disturbing and far-reaching as this, the weight of every minute is felt by an entire community. The aftermath of Jacob Marshall's arrest did not bring immediate relief or closure. Instead, in the months and years that followed, the legal process unfolded under the unblinking attention of the public, press, and a host of traumatized families who demanded answers and accountability. The state of New Jersey soon realized there was no precedent for a trial of this magnitude. The evidence cataloged was staggering. Hundreds of hours of digital transcripts, thousands of pages of forensic reports, psychological evaluations, and the voices of experts in criminal behavior, digital forensics, and victim advocacy. For families whose children had vanished into the shadows, the justice system became both a beacon and a torment. Each pretrial hearing or motion was agonizingly technical, but for the survivors and families it marked another day of living with the unthinkable. Court proceedings stretched close to 3 years, lengthened by the complexity of integrating cyber evidence, the need for psychological assessment of the accused, and the demands of due process in a case with national repercussions. The trial itself became a media event. The courthouse steps teemed with satellite vans, protesters, and advocates. Inside, the jury heard not just the catalog of physical horrors but also the expert testimony about how manipulation, digital grooming, and societal blind spots contributed to the chain of tragedies. Evidence showed chilling premeditation and psychological calculation. Prosecutors laid bare the conversations and planning that marked Marshall as, in their words, a predator in the age of algorithms. Defense attorneys, facing the impossibility of refuting the facts, leaned heavily on Marshall's isolation, mental illness, and the failures of the social support system. Still, the jury was resolute. For each victim whose memory hung in the air, justice demanded a reckoning. In the end, the conviction was unanimous. Marshall was sentenced to death, a rare and polarizing outcome in New Jersey's legal history. The verdict did not bring back the lost, nor could it erase the trauma left behind, but it did cement a collective determination. The community would not allow its most vulnerable members to remain invisible again. The impact of the trial reverberated far beyond the courtroom. On social media, where many of the events had their genesis, a wave of reflection and reform swept across platforms. Major networks and technology companies began rolling out new algorithms to identify at-risk users and suicidal ideations, flagging patterns of desperate outreach for potential intervention. Educational campaigns targeted parents, educators, and mental health professionals, arming them with resources to recognize and respond to warning signs. Schools incorporated digital literacy and cyber safety into their curricula, Therapists and caseworkers received advanced training on the nuances of online grooming and manipulation. The tragedy also forced a broader reckoning with America's social services infrastructure. Panels and policy forums sprang up, digging into questions of foster care reform, gaps in mental health care, and the chronic underfunding of youth support systems. Laws were proposed to strengthen coordination between agencies, ensuring the kind of holistic support vulnerable young adults desperately needed. Some families, forever changed, launched foundations and support groups fighting for legislative change and offering peer counseling for those in pain. In neighborhoods once marked only by shock and sadness, grassroots activism blossomed. Candlelit vigils turned into regular meetings where parents, survivors, police, and local officials strategized on everything from after-school programs to neighborhood watch initiatives tied to digital reporting. Artists painted murals with the names and faces of the victims, a permanent reminder that they would never be forgotten in the noise of the city. Through all this, countless individuals found the strength to tell their own stories. Survivors of online predation, previously silenced by shame or fear, began writing blogs, speaking in community centers, and joining support networks, breaking the cycle of isolation that gave predators their cover. The press, for its part, grew less sensational and more focused on investigative journalism that kept a spotlight on systemic issues long after the headlines faded. For me, witnessing this communal awakening was as heartbreaking as it was inspiring. There is no victory in stories of such suffering, only the reminder that progress comes painfully, one conversation at a time, through the willingness to face hard truths. The trial of Jacob Marshall became more than a verdict. It was the catalyst that shook an entire region awake, spurring a promise to see, protect, and value those who might otherwise be lost. If there is a lesson etched into the record of those long court days, it is this. Justice is not just a matter of punishing evil, it is a mandate to listen, to act, and to build a world where such darkness has no place left to hide.